Most people believe Selfridges is a British triumph, a cathedral of consumption born from Edwardian confidence and London elegance. But the man who built it arrived alone at night from Chicago, carrying 400,000 pounds that did not belong to him. In 1909, Harry Gordon Selfridge opened the grandest store in Europe while quietly running from American prosecutors, stolen ledgers, and a former employer who had taught him everything. For 3 decades, royalty strolled his marble floors, never knowing the building beneath their feet was funded by betrayal. How long can a dream survive when its foundation is a crime? The salesman who wanted more. Harry Selfridge learned early that charm could open doors faster than honesty, and that ambition rarely asks permission. He was born in 1858 in a small Wisconsin town where the only wealth came from logging camps and broken promises. His father abandoned the family before Harry turned 5. His mother took in boarders. They moved constantly. By the time he was 10, Harry understood that survival meant making people believe you were more than you were. It meant wearing clean collars even when you owned only one shirt. It meant speaking as though you belonged in rooms you had never entered. At 14, he left school for work. At 20, he talked his way into a job at Marshall Field and Company in Chicago. The store was already becoming a legend. Marshall Field himself had built an empire on a single revolutionary idea. Women should feel safe shopping alone. They should linger, browse, touch the fabrics without being rushed toward a purchase. Field understood that comfort sold more than pressure. Selfridge watched and learned. He started in the stockroom. Within 2 years, he was managing a department. Within 5, he was Field's right hand. He redesigned window displays to tell stories instead of showing products. He introduced the bargain basement concept. He trained staff to say, "The customer is always right," a phrase he would later claim as his own invention. Field gave him power, responsibility, and a salary that made him wealthy by any reasonable standard. But Harry Selfridge did not measure himself by reasonable standards. He watched Marshall Field move through society with quiet authority. Field belonged to the best clubs. His name opened doors in New York, London, Paris. He was not just rich, he was legitimate. Selfridge wanted that legitimacy with an ache that never faded. He bought tailored suits. He learned French. He studied architecture and art history. He married Rose Buckingham, a woman from a respectable Chicago family, because her name carried the weight his did not. Still, he remained an employee, a brilliant employee, an indispensable employee, but an employee nonetheless. The resentment grew slowly, almost invisibly, like water seeping into stone. Selfridge began to blur the line between his ideas and the company's resources. He spent Field's money on experimental promotions without approval. He signed contracts using authority he did not technically possess. When questioned, he pointed to the results. These sales numbers justified everything. Marshall Field tolerated it because Selfridge made him richer. But tolerance is not ownership. By 1904, Selfridge was 46 years old and wealthy enough to retire. Instead, he felt trapped. Every innovation he created belonged to someone else. Every success added to another man's legend. He began sketching plans for his own store, something grander than anything Chicago had seen. He showed the drawings to Field, proposing a partnership. Field said no. Not because the idea was bad, because Selfridge was overreaching. Because employees, no matter how brilliant, did not become equals. The refusal was polite, even kind. It destroyed something inside Harry Selfridge. He began to see the fortune he had helped build, as partially his. The money Field controlled felt like money Field was keeping from him. He started taking it back. When borrowing became theft, the missing money was not discovered all at once, but in small absences that slowly formed a pattern no ledger could ignore. Selfridge understood Marshall Field's accounting systems better than anyone except Field himself. He knew where the controls were weak. He knew which clerks were overworked and which accounts were rarely audited. He knew that in a business moving millions of dollars through dozens of departments, small discrepancies could hide for months. He began with expense reimbursements. A business trip to New York cost $200, but he claimed $300. The difference went into his pocket. Then came fictitious supplier payments. He created invoices for services never rendered, approved them himself, and intercepted the funds. The amounts increased gradually. $500, $1,000, $3,000 at once. The thefts were not crude. Selfridge did not raid the safe or forge signatures. He exploited the trust Marshall Field had placed in him. He used legitimate processes in illegitimate ways. Each transaction, viewed alone, seemed plausible. Only when viewed together did they form a shape that could not be explained. He justified it with practiced ease. The company owed him more than his salary reflected. His ideas had generated millions in profit. Field was old and cautious. The money would be used for something ambitious, something that would ultimately benefit everyone. He told himself he was borrowing against future success, that he would pay it back once his own store opened. The lies we tell ourselves are always the most convincing. By 1906, Selfridge had quietly diverted close to £200,000. The sum was staggering. In modern terms, it approached $20 million. He converted it carefully into bonds and foreign accounts, moving it beyond the reach of easy discovery. He began traveling to London, frequently, ostensibly, to study European retail trends. In reality, he was scouting locations and meeting with British bankers who did not know Marshall Field and would not ask difficult questions. The internal controls at Marshall Field and Company were typical for the era. Businesses trusted their senior managers. Audits were infrequent and focused on catching dishonest clerks, not dishonest executives. The idea that someone of Selfridge's stature would steal seemed absurd. Status itself was a kind of armor. But even the best deception contains the seeds of its own discovery. In early 1907, a junior accountant noticed irregularities in several supplier accounts. The patterns were subtle but unmistakable. Payments going to vendors who could not be verified. Reimbursements for expenses that seemed inflated. The accountant brought his concerns to a senior manager. The investigation began quietly. They did not want to alarm Marshall Field until they had proof. Selfridge saw the signs before they saw him. Documents were being requested that had not been requested before. Colleagues asked casual questions that felt less than casual. He felt the walls beginning to close. The total embezzled sum had now reached nearly £400,000. There was no explaining it away, no graceful exit. If discovered, he would face criminal prosecution. His name would be destroyed. His family would be ruined. He had one option: run, escape, disguised as opportunity. On paper, the move to London looked like ambition, but in reality, it was timed with frightening precision. In March of 1907, Harry Selfridge resigned from Marshall Field and Company. He cited personal reasons and a desire to pursue independent ventures. Marshall Field accepted the resignation with genuine sadness. He had no idea what his protege had done. The internal investigation was still gathering evidence. The full scope of the theft had not yet been revealed. Selfridge left Chicago within days. He told friends and family he was relocating to London to pursue his dream of building the world's greatest department store. The explanation sounded bold and visionary. No one questioned it. Wealthy men chased grand ambitions. It was what they did. His wife Rose was less enthusiastic about leaving America, but she trusted her husband. Their children were young enough to adapt. The timing was perfect. Selfridge departed before the investigation could focus on him personally. By the time Marshall Field's accountants understood the full extent of the embezzlement, Harry Selfridge was across the Atlantic, beyond the practical reach of American prosecutors. Extradition for financial crimes was difficult, expensive, and politically complicated. Field would have to decide whether pursuing justice was worth the public scandal. He chose silence. Marshall Field was 70 years old and ill. The stress of a public trial, the revelation that his most trusted manager had robbed him, would humiliate the company and damage its reputation. Field absorbed the loss privately. He tightened internal controls. He never spoke publicly about what Selfridge had done. When Field died in 1906, the secret died with him. The new management knew about the theft, but saw no benefit in resurrecting it. Harry Selfridge was free. He arrived in London with hundreds of thousands of pounds in liquid capital and a detailed plan. He had studied the city's retail landscape during his earlier trips. London's department stores were elegant but old-fashioned. They treated shopping as a transaction, not an experience. Women were still chaperoned. Merchandise was kept behind counters. The atmosphere was formal, almost intimidating. Selfridge saw opportunity. He began scouting Oxford Street, the wide thoroughfare cutting through the West End. The street was transitioning from residential to commercial. Property values were rising, but still affordable for someone with his resources. In 1908, he secured a massive plot on the unfashionable western end of Oxford Street. Locals thought he was mad. The location was too far from the established shopping districts. The investment seemed reckless. But Selfridge understood something others did not. London was expanding westward. The new underground lines would bring customers directly to his doors. He was not building for today. He was building for tomorrow. He hired American architects who understood his vision of open floors and natural light. He commissioned the finest materials: marble from Italy, brass fittings from Birmingham, glass from France. The building would span an entire city block. It would contain 100 departments. It would make every other store in London look provincial. The construction began in 1908. Selfridge personally oversaw every detail. He demanded perfection, because perfection was the point. The store was not just a business. It was proof that he belonged among the great men of commerce. It was vindication. It was erasure of everything he had been before. The money he had stolen made it all possible. On March 15, 1909, Selfridges opened its doors. 80,000 people came on the first day. They wandered through departments arranged by color and theme rather than product type. They touched fabrics freely. They sat in comfortable chairs. They used the restrooms and the restaurant without buying anything. The staff smiled and said the customer is always right. London had never seen anything like it. The newspapers called it a revolution. King Edward VII sent his compliments. Society women made it their daily destination. Within weeks, Selfridges was not just a store, it was a landmark. Harry Selfridge was not just a shopkeeper, he was a visionary. And every night, alone in his office, he read American newspapers, searching for any mention of his name connected to the word investigation. The silence held. Building a palace of trust. The doors of Selfridges opened onto perfume, light, and confidence, carefully designed to make shoppers feel safe. The ground floor stretched for acres. Counters gleamed under electric chandeliers that mimicked daylight. Perfume filled the air, a deliberate choice to create olfactory memory. Women entered alone or in pairs, without male escorts, without hesitation. This was Selfridges' core innovation. Not the architecture or the merchandise, but the atmosphere of permission. Shopping became leisure. Browsing became acceptable. But there was nothing original about the concept. Every principle Selfridge deployed at Selfridges came directly from Marshall Field's Chicago playbook. The open floor plan, the no-pressure sales approach, the notion that stores should be destinations, not transactions. Field had pioneered these ideas 2 decades earlier. Selfridge had simply transplanted them across an ocean and claimed them as breakthroughs. The British press did not know this. They treated Selfridge as a retail prophet. He encouraged the myth. In interviews, he spoke vaguely about European influences and his own instincts. He never mentioned Marshall Field by name. He rewrote his biography to emphasize his independence. The years of working for someone else disappeared. He became a self-made genius who arrived in London with vision and capital. London believed him. The store's success was immediate and enormous. In the first year, Selfridges generated over £100,000 in profit. By 1912, it was the most profitable department store in Europe. Selfridge expanded the building, adding wings and floors. He introduced new departments: books, toys, home furnishings, a rooftop garden, an information bureau where customers could ask any question and receive thoughtful answers. He spent lavishly on advertising, full-page newspaper spreads, posters on omnibuses, publicity stunts that blurred commerce and entertainment. When Louis Blériot flew across the English Channel in 1909, Selfridge displayed the actual airplane in his store within 24 hours. 30,000 people came to see it. They bought things while they were there. Everything was spectacle. Everything was experience. The merchandise was almost secondary. Inside the store, the operations ran with military precision. Selfridge hired over 3,000 employees. He paid them better than competitors and demanded absolute loyalty in return. Staff meetings felt like religious services. He preached the gospel of customer service with evangelical fervor. Employees were not clerks. They were ambassadors. The store was not a business. It was a movement. He controlled every detail: the temperature in each department, the height of displays, the training scripts for new hires. Nothing happened without his approval. Colleagues found him charming, but exhausting. He worked 16-hour days and expected others to match his intensity. He took criticism personally and praise as confirmation of destiny. Behind the public face of innovation, Selfridge was haunted by the fragility of his position. The store was successful, but success required constant growth. He reinvested every pound of profit into expansion, advertising, and spectacle. He kept almost nothing in reserve. The business model depended on momentum. If growth stalled, the entire structure would reveal itself as overextended. And there was still the matter of the stolen money. £400,000 had built Selfridges, but that money was not legally his. The store's title, its assets, its future profits belonged to a man who had no right to them. Selfridge had created a palace of trust on a foundation of betrayal. Every customer who believed in him, every employee who depended on him, every banker who lent to him, did so based on a lie. He told himself the lie did not matter. The store was real, the jobs were real, the innovation was real. Whatever he had done in Chicago was erased by what he had built in London. Redemption was possible through achievement. But at night, reading those American newspapers, he knew better. Marshall Field and Company had not pursued him, but they had not forgiven him either. If anyone ever decided to investigate, to dig into his finances, to ask where an American shopkeeper had found £400,000 in 1908, the answers would destroy everything. So he built higher and faster, as if success could outrun truth. The gentleman act, becoming British, required more than tailoring. It required forgetting who he had been. Harry Selfridge understood that London society operated on codes invisible to outsiders. Birth mattered. Lineage mattered. An American shopkeeper, no matter how successful, would always be betrayed unless he transcended the category entirely. He set about erasing the distance between himself and the aristocracy with methodical determination. He bought Highcliffe Castle, a sprawling estate on the southern coast. The purchase was extravagant and strategic. Castles conferred legitimacy. He renovated it in grand style, hosting weekend parties for politicians, artists, and minor royals. The guest lists read like Debrett's peerage. Cabinet ministers dined at his table. He served French wine and discussed European politics with practiced fluency. His wife Rose played her role perfectly. She was American but respectable, charming without being forward. Their children attended the best schools. The family projected wholesome prosperity. Selfridge cultivated the image of a devoted husband and father, even as his private life began to fracture in ways the public never saw. He donated generously to charities, hospitals, museums, war relief funds. Every donation came with his name attached. Selfridge understood that philanthropy was both obligation and advertising. The wealthy gave because society expected it, but also because generosity purchased reputation. He gave enough to be noticed, but not so much that people questioned his motives. The social climbing worked. By 1912, Selfridge was dining with dukes. King George V visited the store. Queen Mary shopped there regularly. Selfridge was invited to royal garden parties. He was asked to serve on government committees. He was becoming the thing he had always wanted to be, a gentleman. But the transformation was exhausting. Every conversation required vigilance. He could not reminisce about Chicago without risking questions about his past. He could not discuss his early career without revealing his decades as an employee. He certainly could not mention Marshall Field. The stories he told about himself became increasingly vague and mythologized. He had been a visionary. He had seen opportunities. He had taken risks. The details dissolved into generalities. Privately, he monitored every piece of correspondence from America. Letters from old acquaintances were read with paranoia. Any mention of Marshall Field and Company triggered anxiety. He burned documents that might connect him to Chicago. He instructed his staff to destroy old business records. He was building a new past by erasing the real one. The fear never fully disappeared. In 1914, the First World War began. Selfridge threw himself into war work with genuine passion. He raised funds for soldiers. He turned parts of the store into recruitment centers. He visited hospitals and wrote letters to bereaved families. The patriotism was real, but it also served a purpose. Nothing proved British belonging like sacrifice for Britain. The war also distracted from questions about money. Everyone's finances were strained. Rationing and shortages affected all businesses. If Selfridges' profits declined, it was because of the war, not mismanagement. The chaos provided cover, but the war also exposed how much of his success depended on spectacle and excess. Customers had less money. Luxury goods became morally questionable. Selfridges survived, but the trajectory of endless growth stalled. For the first time, Selfridge had to manage a business in contraction rather than expansion. He did not adapt well. His instinct was always to spend more, to create bigger displays, to out-advertise competitors. The war forced restraint. He resented it. Restraint felt like retreat. Retreat felt like weakness. Weakness reminded him of being an employee, of being powerless, of being someone who could be dismissed. So even as the store struggled, he maintained his personal spending. The castle, the parties, the donations. He lived as though nothing had changed, because changing would mean admitting vulnerability. Appearances were everything. The moment people believed he was failing, they would begin asking questions. Questions led to investigations. Investigations led to Chicago, and Chicago led to prison. Success that could not rest. Even at his peak, Selfridge could not stop spending, as if tomorrow might never arrive. The 1920s brought a feverish optimism to London. The war was over. The economy rebounded. Selfridges became the symbol of modern prosperity. Women in flapper dresses crowded the cosmetics counters. Jazz music played in the restaurant. The store sold not just products, but possibility. The future seemed limitless. Selfridge's personal life, however, was collapsing in private. His wife Rose died suddenly in 1918 during the influenza epidemic. The loss devastated him. She had been his anchor to respectability, his connection to legitimacy. Without her, the facade began to crack. He started spending recklessly on mistresses. He gambled at casinos in Monte Carlo and Deauville. He bought yachts and racehorses. He threw parties that scandalized even permissive society. The Dolly sisters became his obsession. Jenny and Rosie Dolly were Hungarian-American dancers, beautiful and mercenary. They cost him a fortune. He bought them jewelry worth tens of thousands of pounds. He funded their gambling habits. He followed them across Europe like a besotted fool. London society whispered. The newspapers hinted. His children were embarrassed. But Selfridge could not stop. The spending was compulsive, almost frantic. It was as if he was trying to prove something to himself, that he deserved the wealth, that he belonged in these circles, that no one could tell him no. Every purchase was a small rebellion against his past as a clerk. Every extravagance was proof he had escaped the limits that once defined him. The store's profits, however, were not infinite. By 1925, Selfridges was generating over £400,000 annually in revenue. Impressive, but not enough to cover Selfridge's personal expenditures and the constant reinvestment he demanded. He began borrowing against the company, quietly at first, loans secured by company assets, credit extended by bankers who assumed his wealth was personal rather than corporate. The financial structure was becoming dangerously unstable. Selfridge refused to see it, or perhaps he saw it and chose denial. His management style had always prioritized vision over accounting. He trusted his instincts more than balance sheets. When advisors warned about cash flow problems, he dismissed them. When partners suggested restraint, he accused them of lacking imagination. The store itself remained successful, but success and solvency are different things. Selfridges was moving enormous amounts of money while retaining almost none of it. Every pound came in and went out immediately. There was no cushion, no reserves. The business survived on momentum and credit. As long as growth continued, the structure held. But growth was slowing. Competition had intensified. Harrods, Liberty, and other London stores had copied Selfridges' innovations. The advantage he once held was disappearing. Shopping districts were emerging. Oxford Street was no longer the only destination. Customers had options. Selfridge responded by spending more on advertising and spectacle. He installed elaborate window displays that cost thousands of pounds. He hosted fashion shows and celebrity appearances. He kept the store open later and staffed it more heavily. Every initiative cost money and produced diminishing returns. By 1930, the Great Depression had begun. Luxury spending evaporated. Unemployment soared. Selfridges saw sales decline for the first time in its history. The business that had seemed invincible suddenly looked fragile. Selfridge's personal debts now exceeded £500,000. His gambling losses alone approached £100,000. The Dolly sisters had drained him of cash and jewelry. He owed money to casinos, banks, and private lenders. His assets were mortgaged to the limit. He began selling pieces of the company to raise funds. Shares went to bankers and investors. Control diluted. The man who had built Selfridges was slowly losing ownership of it. Not through failure, but through indulgence. His children tried to intervene. They begged him to stop gambling, to cut expenses, to live within his means. He promised he would. Then he returned to Monte Carlo the next week. The same instincts that had built an empire were now destroying him. The need to prove himself, the refusal to accept limits, the belief that confidence could overcome reality. These traits had made him a visionary. They were now making him a cautionary tale. And through it all, the fundamental lie remained. The £400,000 that built Selfridges still belonged to someone else. The entire structure rested on a crime that had never been accounted for. Success had not erased it. Time had not absolved it. The debt, moral and financial, was still outstanding. Selfridge had spent 30 years running from that truth. Now, it was catching up. When confidence became delusion. The same instincts that once built an empire now pushed Selfridge to ignore every warning. By 1933, the financial reality was undeniable. Selfridges was insolvent. The company owed more than it owned. Creditors were demanding payment. Suppliers were refusing to extend credit. The store's board of directors, now dominated by bankers and investors, met in emergency sessions to discuss survival strategies. Selfridge attended these meetings with fading authority. He was still chairman, but only in title. The real power belonged to the lenders. They controlled the assets. They made the decisions. They tolerated his presence out of sentimentality and concern for public perception. Firing the founder would damage the brand. But his involvement was increasingly symbolic. He proposed grandiose expansion plans, a new wing, a hotel, a transatlantic partnership. The board listened politely and ignored him. His ideas no longer inspired confidence. They inspired concern. Colleagues whispered that he had lost touch with reality, that he was living in 1909 when anything seemed possible. Selfridge refused to accept diminishment. He gave interviews to newspapers proclaiming Selfridge's bright future. He attended store openings and charity events as though nothing had changed. The performance was unconvincing. People could see the desperation. His suits were still expensive but slightly worn. His face showed the strain of sleepless nights and mounting panic. The economy worsened. Adolf Hitler rose to power in Germany. Political instability spread across Europe. Consumer confidence collapsed. Selfridges' sales fell by 30%. Employees were laid off. Departments closed. The rooftop garden was abandoned. The information bureau shut down. The store was shrinking. Selfridge tried to rally the staff with inspirational speeches about perseverance and British resilience. He reminded them of the early days when skeptics said Oxford Street was too far west. He promised that confidence and hard work would triumph. But the words rang hollow. Confidence does not pay wages. Hard work does not satisfy creditors. In 1935, the board forced a reorganization. Selfridge was removed as managing director. He retained the title of chairman, but lost operational control. Professional managers were brought in to stabilize the business. They implemented cost-cutting measures. They renegotiated contracts. They did what Selfridge had refused to do. They accepted reality. The store stabilized, slowly, painfully, but it survived. Selfridge did not. He watched from the sidelines as others saved the company he had built. Every competent decision they made was an indictment of his incompetence. Every necessary cut was evidence of his excess. He had believed his vision made him indispensable. He was learning that businesses survive their founders. His personal finances collapsed completely. Highcliffe Castle was sold to cover debts. His art collection was auctioned. His investments liquidated. He moved from Mayfair to a modest flat in Putney. The man who had dined with kings now struggled to pay rent. The Dolly sisters were long gone. They had disappeared as soon as his money ran out. The society friends stopped calling. The invitations ceased. London forgot him with brutal efficiency. He had been useful and entertaining when wealthy. Poor, he was merely embarrassing. In 1939, the Second World War began. Selfridges was bombed during the Blitz. The building survived, but Selfridge was not there to see it. He had been removed from the board entirely. His final connection to the store was severed. He was banned from entering as anything other than a customer. He tried once. He walked through the doors and wandered the aisles like a ghost. An employee recognized him and called security. They asked him to leave. He was trespassing in the building he had created. He never returned. Exile inside his own store. The man who once ruled Oxford Street now wandered it as a guest. Harry Selfridge spent his final years in a small apartment on the wrong side of London. The address was respectable enough to avoid complete humiliation, but modest enough to confirm his fall. He lived on a small pension provided reluctantly by the company that bore his name. The amount was calculated to keep him quiet rather than comfortable. He had no income beyond the pension, no investments, no savings. The fortune he had stolen and spent was gone. The wealth he had generated through the store belonged to shareholders and creditors. He owned nothing except memories and regrets. His children supported him when they could, but their resources were limited. The depression had affected everyone. His relationship with them was strained. They loved him but could not respect him. He had squandered their inheritance on gambling and mistresses. He had humiliated their mother's memory. He had taught them that ambition without discipline leads to ruin. He wrote letters to old friends asking for loans. Few responded. Those who did sent polite refusals. No one wanted to pour money into a man who had proven incapable of managing it. His reputation was not for brilliance anymore. It was for excess and failure. Occasionally, he walked past Selfridges. The building stood magnificent and indifferent. New owners had modernized it. The windows displayed the latest fashions. Customers streamed in and out. The store thrived without him. His name was still above the door, but it referred to a place, not a person. He was a brand divorced from its creator. Inside, new managers ran operations with efficiency he had never achieved. They balanced budgets. They maintained margins. They made boring, competent decisions that ensured survival. The visionary chaos that defined his tenure had been replaced by professional management. It was less exciting and more sustainable. Selfridge occasionally gave interviews to journalists writing retrospectives. He spoke about the early days with wistful pride. He took credit for innovations that were really Marshall Field's. He omitted the gambling, the mistresses, the debts. He constructed a narrative of triumph, interrupted by bad luck and betrayal. The journalists were kind. They wrote nostalgic pieces about the man who revolutionized shopping. They focused on his achievements and glossed over his failures. Britain was fighting a war. People wanted heroes, not cautionary tales. Selfridge was allowed to be remembered as a pioneer rather than a cautionary tale. But he knew the truth. He had built something extraordinary and destroyed it through weakness. He had been given everything wealth could provide and wasted it on vanity. He had run from one crime only to commit slower, more public crimes against himself and those who depended on him. The war dragged on. London endured the Blitz. Selfridges was damaged but rebuilt. The store became a symbol of British resilience. Its survival mattered more than its history. No one cared where the money to build it had come from. No one remembered the embezzlement. Marshall Field had been dead for 40 years. Chicago was a different world. Harry Selfridge had escaped prosecution. He had built an empire. He had touched greatness, and none of it mattered now. He was an old man in a cheap apartment, forgotten by the city he had once dazzled. In January of 1947, he suffered a stroke. His children were notified. They came to his bedside in a public hospital. There was no private room, no special treatment. He was just another elderly patient in a ward full of elderly patients. He died on May 8, 1947. Victory in Europe Day. The city was celebrating. Crowds filled the streets. No one noticed the passing of an 89-year-old man in a hospital in Putney. The obituaries were respectful but brief. They mentioned Selfridges and his American origins. They noted his contributions to retail. They did not mention the gambling, the debts, or the financial collapse. They certainly did not mention 400,000 pounds stolen from Marshall Field. History had decided what to remember and what to forget, losing everything except the name. By the time the doors finally closed to him, there was almost nothing left to take. Harry Gordon Selfridge was buried in the churchyard of St. Mark's in Highcliffe, near the castle he once owned. The funeral was small. His children attended. A few old friends made the journey. Representatives from Selfridges sent flowers but did not come. There was no eulogy celebrating genius, no tributes from royalty, no mention in Parliament. The man who had once defined London retail was buried like any other middle-class tradesman, quietly, efficiently, with minimal ceremony. His estate was valued at less than £1,000. After funeral expenses and debts, his children inherited almost nothing. The man who had handled millions left them poverty. The irony was not lost on anyone. Selfridges itself continued without pause. The store did not close for mourning. No black drapes appeared in the windows. Business carried on. Customers shopped. Employees worked. The building that had consumed Selfridge's life did not notice his death. Within a year, new management implemented changes that erased his personal touches. The Baroque excess he loved was replaced with modern minimalism. Departments were reorganized for efficiency rather than spectacle. The store became less theatrical and more commercial. It worked. Profits increased. Selfridges thrived in the post-war economy. London was rebuilding. Consumers wanted optimism and modernity, not Edwardian grandeur. The store adapted. It survived because it was willing to forget its founder. The name Selfridge remained above the door, but it had become abstract. Customers knew it as a place, not a person. Young shoppers had no idea who Harry Gordon Selfridge was. They associated the name with quality and tradition, not with the complicated, flawed man who had built it. This was perhaps the cruelest irony. Selfridge had wanted desperately to be remembered, to be legendary, to transcend his origins. He achieved a kind of immortality. His name survived. But the person behind the name was forgotten. He became a label without a biography, a brand without a soul. The 400,000 pounds he stole from Marshall Field had built something lasting. The store stood for over a century. It employed thousands. It served millions. It became a British institution, but it was built on a foundation of theft and maintained through a lifetime of deception. Did that matter? The employees who earned wages at Selfridges did not care where the original capital came from. The customers who found joy shopping there did not consider the moral implications of the funding. The building served a function. It created value. The crime that made it possible was so far in the past that it seemed irrelevant. But for Selfridge himself, the crime never became irrelevant. It defined every decision he made: the need to run from Chicago, the compulsive need to prove his legitimacy, the refusal to accept limits because limits reminded him of powerlessness, the reckless spending that destroyed him financially. He lived his entire adult life as a fugitive from one decision made in desperation decades earlier. The theft did not just fund the store, it poisoned everything that came after. He could never fully enjoy success because success was built on a lie. He could never accept failure because failure would expose the lie. He was trapped between two impossibilities. In the end, he lost everything except the name. And the name belonged to a building that did not remember him. A monument that outlived its maker. The building remained while its creator vanished from the story it told. Selfridges today occupies the same Oxford Street block. Harry Gordon Selfridge purchased in 1908. The facade has been updated, the interiors remodeled countless times, but the essential structure remains: the footprint he chose, the scale he imagined, the ambition he embodied. Modern shoppers enter through rotating doors into a world of contemporary luxury. Designer brands occupy prime ground floor space. The perfume counters still fill the air with scent. Escalators carry customers upward through floors of fashion, homewares, and technology. The experience is sophisticated and international. There is no museum exhibit about the founder. No plaques explaining his innovations. The store's history has been simplified into a clean origin story. An American visionary came to London. He built something revolutionary. He changed retail forever. The darker elements have been edited out. This is how institutions survive. They preserve what serves the brand and discard what complicates it. Harry Selfridge is remembered as a pioneer, not a thief. As an innovator, not an embezzler. The complexity of his character is flattened into mythology. The company was sold multiple times over the decades. Department store chains bought it. Investment firms bought it. Each owner maintained the Selfridge name because the name carried value. The man disappeared, but the brand endured. This was exactly what Selfridge wanted and exactly what he feared. He wanted immortality through achievement. He got it. But the achievement was severed from his personhood. He became a symbol rather than a human being. The messiness of his life, the contradictions of his character, the crime that funded everything, all of it vanished into corporate history. Selfridges is now owned by a Thai conglomerate. It operates as part of a global luxury retail network. The Oxford Street location remains the flagship, but there are branches in Manchester and Birmingham. Online shopping has become as important as physical stores. The business model Selfridge pioneered has evolved beyond recognition, but the core idea remains: shopping as experience, stores as destinations, customers as guests rather than transactions. These principles, stolen from Marshall Field and repackaged for London, define modern retail. Selfridge did not invent them, but he evangelized them effectively. The building itself has become a protected landmark. The facade cannot be significantly altered without permission from heritage authorities. Selfridges is considered architecturally significant, an example of Edwardian commercial grandeur. Tourists photograph it. Historians study it. The structure has outlived its creator by 80 years and shows no signs of disappearing. This is what remains: stone and steel, a brand, a vague awareness of innovation. The man who built it, who sacrificed everything for it, who died alone and broke because of it, is footnote at best. Harry Gordon Selfridge wanted to matter. He wanted to be remembered as someone important, someone who changed things. He achieved that goal in the most hollow way possible. The thing he built survived. He did not. Whose innovation gets remembered history favors the visible success, not the invisible theft behind it. The narrative of retail innovation runs through names like Marshall Field, Harry Selfridge, Gordon Selfridge, and later entrepreneurs who built department store empires. What connects them is not genius, but geography. They moved ideas across borders and claimed them as original insights. Marshall Field understood that women needed safe, comfortable spaces to shop alone. This was genuinely revolutionary in the 1880s. It required reimagining stores as social destinations rather than purely commercial transactions. Field implemented this vision in Chicago and became wealthy beyond imagination. Harry Selfridge watched Field's methods for 25 years. He absorbed every detail. Then he transported those methods to London and presented them as his own innovations. London, unfamiliar with American retail, accepted Selfridge's claims. He was credited with inventing concepts that were already established practice in Chicago. This pattern repeats throughout commercial history. Ideas flow from one market to another. The person who brings them across is often remembered as the inventor rather than the imitator. Context matters more than chronology. But there is a darker element to Selfridge's story that complicates simple narratives of innovation. The capital that built Selfridges was stolen. £400,000, embezzled systematically over several years from the company that had taught him everything. This was not a loan, it was theft. Selfridge knew it. Marshall Field knew it. Both chose silence for different reasons. Should that theft matter when evaluating Selfridge's legacy? The store he built was real. The jobs it created were real. The architectural beauty was real. Thousands of employees earned wages at Selfridges over the decades. Millions of customers found pleasure shopping there. The building contributed to London's economy and culture. Does the moral character of the funding invalidate the value of what was built? These questions have no simple answers. We want our heroes to be virtuous. We want innovation to be pure. But history is complicated. Great buildings are often financed through exploitation. Beautiful art is sometimes created by terrible people. The value of the work exists separately from the character of its creator. Selfridges' theft allowed something to exist that might not have existed otherwise. Without that stolen capital, he could not have built Selfridges at the scale and speed he did. The store might have been built eventually by someone else, but it would have been different. Selfridges' personality, his obsession with spectacle, his desperate need to prove himself, all shaped what Selfridges became. The crime enabled the achievement. Separating them is impossible. Modern corporations built on questionable foundations face similar reckonings. Companies founded through exploitation or theft eventually outlive their origins. New management arrives. Ownership changes. The founding sins are forgotten or forgiven. The entity persists while the moral complexity fades. Selfridges is a British institution now. Its American origins are acknowledged but not emphasized. The theft that funded it is unknown to almost everyone. Marshall Field and Company no longer exists. The victim has disappeared from history while the crime has been transformed into legend. This is how collective memory works. We remember what serves us. We forget what complicates the narrative. Selfridge is remembered as a visionary because that story is useful. Remembering him as a thief who got away with it serves no contemporary purpose. But forgetting has costs too. When we erase the moral complexity of historical figures, we lose important lessons. Selfridge's story should teach us that brilliance and criminality can coexist, that success does not absolve wrongdoing, that buildings can outlast the men who built them, but the foundations remain. The question is not whether Selfridges should exist. It does exist. It has value. The question is whether we can acknowledge its complicated origins without diminishing what it became. Perhaps we can hold both truths simultaneously. Selfridges is a triumph of retail innovation and a monument to theft. Harry Selfridge was a visionary and a criminal. Both statements are accurate. Both deserve to be remembered. History is not simple. Neither are the people who make it. The cost of reinvention. Selfridges still glows at night, but its light casts long shadows backward through time. Stand on Oxford Street at dusk and watch the lights come on inside Selfridges. The windows illuminate. The displays glow. Shoppers move through the aisles like actors in a carefully staged production. The building pulses with life and commerce. It is beautiful and impersonal, magnificent and mechanical. Harry Gordon Selfridge would recognize it and not recognize it. The scale is familiar. The ambition is familiar. But the soul is different. Or perhaps there never was a soul. Perhaps it was always just a building, and Selfridge projected onto it meanings it never possessed. He wanted Selfridges to be proof of his worthiness, proof that he belonged among the elite, proof that a boy from Wisconsin with no father and no prospects could transform himself into someone who mattered. The building was supposed to erase his past and validate his present. It did neither. His past followed him across the Atlantic. The money he stole remained stolen no matter how beautifully he spent it. The lies he told became more elaborate, but no less false. The respectability he craved remained permanently out of reach because it was built on a foundation that could not support it. Selfridge's tragedy was not failure. He succeeded wildly by any external measure. He built one of the great stores of the world. He transformed retail. He became famous, wealthy, and influential. By his own stated goals, he won. But winning did not bring him peace. Success did not erase the crime. Wealth did not quiet the fear. He spent 40 years running from a decision made in desperation, and the running destroyed him more thoroughly than any prosecution could have. This is the cost of reinvention built on deception. You can change your name, your location, your circumstances. You can build monuments and cultivate legends. But you cannot change what you did. The foundation remains. And eventually, structures built on flawed foundations collapse. Selfridges, the building survived. Selfridge, the man, did not. The irony is precise. He sacrificed everything for the store, and the store discarded him the moment he became inconvenient. The relationship was never reciprocal. Buildings do not love their creators. Institutions do not remember their founders with gratitude. What should we take from this story? Perhaps that ambition without ethics is dangerous. That theft, even when used to create beauty, remains theft. That reinvention is possible, but requires honesty about what is being left behind. Or perhaps the lesson is darker. That crime sometimes does pay. That Selfridge lived a remarkable life, touched greatness, and died naturally rather than in prison. That the building he created through theft has brought joy to millions who will never know or care about its origins. Both interpretations are valid. History does not provide clean moral conclusions. It provides complicated stories about complicated people who made complicated choices. Harry Gordon Selfridge was brilliant and flawed, visionary and criminal, generous and selfish. He created something lasting through means that were indefensible. He wanted to be remembered as a great man. Instead, he is remembered as a brand name. The building remains. The man is gone. The theft is forgotten. And every night, the lights of Selfridges illuminate Oxford Street, casting no judgment, offering no answers, simply existing as a monument to ambition and its discontents.